Welcome to the second video in this series on melody. In our last video, we discussed musical motifs. We covered what motifs are, what makes a strong one, and just a simple approach to writing high-quality motivic ideas. In this video, we are going to take the next logical step and discuss how to develop multiple variations of a single musical idea. We won't worry about organizing them into themes quite yet, since that will be next week's video. However, we will learn a number of strategies that can be used to develop a single idea into something larger. Before we go any further, I do want to take a quick moment to thank the amazing people who are my patrons. Your kind support of this channel allows me to continue making videos like this one every week. I truly appreciate each of you and am grateful for your support. If you're interested in becoming a patron or making a one-time contribution to the channel, there are links in the description of this video. All proceeds go towards helping me to make payments for my tuition. So with that, let's get started. In most music, you'll find that the primary motivic ideas develop over time. You'll very rarely find the same idea being repeated over and over again without any kind of change happening. That wouldn't exactly be a winning strategy for keeping your audience's attention. Generally, once an important motivic idea has been established, the composer will manipulate it by changing different characteristics of the idea over time. Repeating a single motivic idea with some changes added is a common approach taken to writing melodies. If you've seen my previous videos on motifs, you might remember the Private method for writing melodic phrases. In that method, a motif is presented, then repeated with minimal to no variation added, before a heavier variation of the motif is used. Then, everything is capped off with a deconstructed version to end the entire phrase. In this strategy, a single motivic idea is repeated up to 4 times, with differing degrees of variation being added with each repetition. The resulting effect is that the audience doesn't necessarily hear the phrase as 4 distinct repetitions of the same idea. Instead, their brain will process the entire phrase as a single thematic statement. The trick to this is to figure out how to add variation to your initial idea. In general, there are 2 basic types of variation that you can use to develop a motif: rhythmic variation and melodic variation. Rhythmic variation, as the name suggests, has to deal with how the motif develops rhythmically. It mostly deals with how the tempo and note values can change to give the motif a fresh personality. Melodic variation has more to do with how the individual pitches and intervals can be manipulated to keep the motif fresh. You can lead your motivic statements in vastly different directions depending on which strategies you take at any given moment. So let's take a closer look at how each of these strategies can be applied. And first up, we'll start with rhythmic variation. Right away, we can address augmentation and diminution. These are both strategies that have to do with manipulating the pace of a motivic idea, or how quickly or slowly it is played. Augmentation is the term used when you stretch out a motif to make it sound longer. This can be done either by slowing down the tempo or by changing the actual lengths of each note by the same ratio. In this case, we have the original motivic statement. And then we have a repetition of the same motivic idea, but this time, all of the note values have been doubled. What were previously eighth notes are now quarter notes, and what were previously quarter notes are now half notes. Diminution is the exact opposite idea. It's the squishing of a motif to make it sound shorter or quicker. This can be done by either speeding up the tempo or by changing the actual lengths of each note by the same ratio. So, like the last example, we could cut each note value in half. What were previously eighth notes are now 16th notes, and what were previously quarter notes are now eighth notes. Both of these strategies are excellent choices for when you want to manipulate the energy or personality of a motif. They can create a very different feel for your motivic material just by manipulating how quickly they are played through time. Closely related to these two ideas is the strategy of rhythmic transformation. Here we have two types, additive transformation and subtractive transformation. These tools are basically more specialized forms of augmentation and diminution. While rhythmically augmenting a motif means that every single note is lengthened by the same ratio, additive transformation means that only one or more specific notes have their length changed, and not necessarily by the same ratio. Subtractive transformation is the same basic idea, but has to deal with reducing the lengths of specific notes. For example, here is our original motif. Now listen to how it sounds after I turn this first note into a quarter note, and this fourth note into an eighth note. Notice how the personality has changed. Rhythmic transformation can shift the naturally occurring accents found in the motif, with an impact ranging from subtle to absolutely massive. It all depends on how much you want to change the original idea. Next, we've got metric displacement. Here, the idea isn't so much about shifting the values or length of the motivic idea, but just shifting it to a different starting point in your meter, relative to the time signature. The main change that happens here has to do with manipulating the accents of your motif by shifting its relationship with the naturally occurring strong and weak beats in the meter. For example, our motivic example is written in 4/4 time. That means that there are 4 beats in a single bar, and one beat is equal to one quarter note. In 4/4 time, the strongest beat is beat 1. The next strongest is on beat 3, with both beats 2 and 4 being considered comparatively weak. Regardless of whether we are consciously aware of it or not, this pattern of strong, weak impacts the feel of the motif. To demonstrate this impact, let's listen to the motif with a simple drum groove added. So what happens if I shift the motif over by one beat and have it start on beat 2? Did you hear how those sound different? The naturally occurring accents of the meter color where the accents of the motif are heard. This results in a change in the personality for the music. Like we saw with rhythmic transformation, this change can range from subtle to dramatic. It can be used as a powerful tool to add variation to a motivic idea without having to change any of the actual rhythmic values of the motif. Another closely related concept is changing the time signature. This has a similar concept, taking the same motivic idea, but changing the time signature, which can have a dramatic impact on the personality of the motif. For example, what if we took the original idea and transposed it, note for note, into 3/4 time? While 4/4 has a pulse of strong, weak, 3/4 time has a pulse of strong, weak, strong, weak, which has an interesting impact on our idea. Another common strategy to accompany this is to rhythmically transform the idea as well, to help it fit within the same number of bars in the new meter, which naturally results in even further changes to the feel of the motif. As you can see, most of these strategies have to deal with manipulating the placement of the naturally occurring accents within the motivic statement. They're each their own clever little strategy of manipulating what already occurs in the music to create new personalities and feels for the original idea. However, the last rhythmic strategy doesn't try to be quite so subtle. Accentuation is the idea that you basically ignore the naturally occurring accents within your music and instead impose your own ideas on where the accents should happen. These accents can be placed at regular intervals to mimic an artificial pulse to the meter, or even irregularly to take complete control and add a bit of chaos to the sound. Regardless of what you do, there are two basic types. Straight accentuation, where you simply add even more emphasis to the naturally occurring strong beats, or syncopated accentuation, where you add accents to traditionally weak pulses in the meter. In either case, this tool is yet another one that can be used to create strikingly new effects in your music. Now, in addition to tools for rhythmic variation, we also have the benefit of melodic variations as an option as well. Perhaps the simplest and most common example of this type of tool is sequencing. This is the simple act of moving a motif either up or down in pitch. This can be done chromatically, where the intervals from one note to the next remain exactly the same, even if it means that the motif will move momentarily outside of the key. For example, here, the entire motif has been moved up exactly a major second, resulting in the use of an F sharp, which does not belong in the key of C major. Sequencing can also be done diatonically, meaning that the intervals from one note to the next can be adjusted as needed in order to remain in the key of the piece. For example, here we have our motif being sequenced up, but with some slight changes made to stay in the key of C major. Namely, the intervals used to arrive at and depart from the third note were reduced to help stay in the key. Sequencing is a pretty simple and straightforward tool for melodic variation, but there are plenty of more elaborate options at your disposal as well. One such tool is called melodic inversion. In this case, the approach is to take the original motif and flip it upside down. Where the original motif moved up in pitch, it will suddenly move down. Likewise, where it once moved down, it will now move up. Now, there are different approaches you can take to this. You can have an exact inversion, which means that the interval types remain the same, but the direction they move in changes. For example, instead of moving up a major second to change from C to D, you move down a major second to move from C to B flat. Or you can use diatonic inversion, where you make small shifts to the inversions in order to keep within the key. For example, changing the original major second from C to B flat to a minor second to go from C to B, so that you don't leave the key of C major. Melodic inversion is a fantastic tool for building a stronger sense of variety to your melodic statement without removing all sense of continuity. Despite the contour of the motif being inverted, the same general shape still exists, allowing the audience to recognize it as being related to the initial statement, even if only subconsciously. Similar to inversion, we have retrograde, which is simply playing the motif backwards. The most basic form of this approach is called complete retrograde, where the motif is played exactly as written, but just flipped backwards, as if being read from right to left. Other options, however, include rhythmic retrograde, where the pitches remain in the original order, but the rhythmic values flip. Or even melodic retrograde, where the opposite is true. The pitches flip order, but the rhythmic values remain unchanged. In any instance, a retrograde is a powerful tool for creating a conceptually related but completely different sounding personality to your motif. It's a great tool for when you want to introduce a stronger level of variation to your melody. Next up, we have fragmentation. In this strategy, a motif is broken down into even smaller chunks, in which one or more of these fragments can be repeated or even removed to make a seemingly new motivic idea. For example, we could split our original motif into two mini motifs and play each one twice. This is a popular strategy used for developing ideas later in a piece, and isn't quite as common in initial statements of a theme. Now, so far, each of these tools has manipulated the motivic statement as a whole, But there are plenty of tools that can also be used more selectively. For example, expansion and contraction. Expansion is a tool in which you increase the interval found between two notes in the motif, like in this example, where the final perfect fifth interval is expanded into a full octave. Contraction is the exact opposite, but the same rule applies. In this case, contraction has to do with reducing the interval found between two notes in the motif. For example, turning the final perfect fifth into a major third. As a general rule, the larger the change, the bigger the impact it will have on the personality of your motif. Another pair of tools that go hand in hand are embellishment and reduction. In embellishment, we add additional decorative tones to a motif. These can be quantitative embellishments or qualitative embellishments. A quantitative embellishment doesn't move any of the notes. The attack or the start of each note in the motif remains exactly where it originally was. But the lengths may be changed to make room for extra notes squeezed in between them. For example, here we split the third and fourth notes into a pair of eighth notes each. The result is a nice little embellishment that doesn't change the fact that the original pitches that were once our third and fourth notes still start on beats 2 and 3 respectively. We can also use qualitative embellishments, which is the opposite of quantitative. In these instances, the added tones can displace or even replace the original notes of a motif. For example, here we have split the fourth and fifth notes of the original motif into pairs of eighth notes. This time, however, the pitches that were originally performed on beats 3 and 4 have been moved to the and of 3 and the and of 4, respectively. Each type has a different impact on the sound of the motif. Reduction is the opposite of embellishment. Instead of adding new notes to the motif, you remove notes that previously existed. This creates a simpler and more minimalistic version of the original motif. You can even take it as far as to remove all but one or two of the most important notes from the original idea. Here, we've removed the second and fourth notes of the original motif. Now, the cool thing about this is that it can set the stage for our final tool, reconstruction. Reconstruction is the only tool we'll discuss that requires the use of a previous strategy first. In this case, a motif must first be reduced before it gets reconstructed. After all but the most important notes are reduced from a motif, it can then be reconstructed by adding new embellishments to the remaining pitches in order to create an entirely new motivic idea. And that pretty much wraps up our discussion on developing motivic ideas. The number of different tools you use and the degree to which you use them will both impact how strong a variation will be. And your ear will be the best tool you have for deciding how closely related a variation actually sounds to the original. Finding out just how much variation to add to a motif within a single melodic statement is a matter of personal taste. However, as a general rule, simple variations, where you can still recognize each statement as being related to the original, are best used for creating continuity within a single melodic phrase. Larger variations, where they sound audibly unrecognizable to the point where it sounds more like new material than a variation of the original, are better used for creating continuity later in a piece by introducing a quote-unquote new idea that is still distantly related to the original statement. In the next video, we'll discuss how to take these variations and organize them into larger melodic phrases and themes. But for now, we have reached the end of yet another video. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe to the channel and share it anywhere that you think other people might find it useful. I want to thank my amazing patrons one more time for their incredible support of this channel. You guys are incredible, and the support you give this channel is what allows me to put so much effort into these videos. I also want to thank each of you who are supporting this channel by watching the videos and leaving likes and comments. Your incredible messages, emails, and comments mean the world to me and help keep me motivated and excited to keep putting out new content. I appreciate each of you more than you know, and am excited to see how this community grows as the series continues. So until next time, as always, keep studying, keep working hard, and keep writing new music.